But anyway, can I now introduce you to Alex Kelly? I'm sorry that session ran over a little bit. Apologies, that was totally my fault. Forgive me. So Alex Kelly, I discovered, I never knew this term before, which is the term impact producer. I had absolutely no idea what the term means. And as soon as I heard that there was such a thing as an impact producer, I was like, I have to know what that is because it sounds amazing. And so I'm really excited to hear about this talk. I'm sorry to hear from Alex about what an impact producer is and does. And I'm interested that you also have that kind of comms background as well and how that plays out. All right, so Alex is an artist, filmmaker, and obviously an impact producer. And she is going to walk us through her incredible process of working across film, communication strategy, and impact making to purposely connect disciplines of art and social change. Thank you, Alex.
Great. Hi everyone. It's really lovely to be here. Although I did get the pre-lunch low energy moment on the program, so I'm hoping to, help you get through this, and you can help me get through this. Thanks. I just want to acknowledge that we're here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also Dja Dja Wurrung country where I've travelled from, and also extend that acknowledgement beyond just country. But when I'm talking about art and social change, the leaders of that work in Australia are First Nations people, and I work a lot in documentary film, so just really want to shout out to Larissa Berent, Rachel Perkins, Rachel Edwardson, Erica Glynn, and the incredible body of work of First Nations filmmakers. So I'm really interested in transformative change, and I'm kind of methodologically agnostic. I kind of don't care what we're doing or how we're doing it. I just want to make sure that we're doing it. And because we're talking about play, I did want to say I can also be playful, even though I'm going to talk a lot about sort of political strategy today. This was when I was working as an impact producer for Naomi Klein. I was in Paris for the COP21, and I took part in the Climate Games, which were the world's largest disobedience action adventure games. It was a competition across Paris during COP21 of direct action groups. So this is me at the Moulin Rouge. We did a We Can action as part of one of those 124 teams. So today I'm just going to let you know a little bit about my practice. I'm going to introduce you to impact producing, and I'm going to share a case study, which is a documentary called In My Blood It Runs. So there's a bit to whip through. So these are a bunch of the films that I've worked on. Most of them I've worked as a producer, an impact producer, although occasionally I direct as well. I've directed Queen of the Desert. I think this morning we've already established, and obviously for most of you in the room, you're already thinking about the power of art. You already know how powerful story is. Harold Goddard talks about this idea that the stories that we tell, the stories that we love and believe in determine the shape of the world. And many people have talked about this. Edward Said talks about the idea that nations themselves are narrations, and we know that the stories that we tell are equally important to the stories that we suppress and exclude. So power of art is obviously, I think also when we step into that place, which I think Gap Filler and Candos spoke about as well, of starting things that you don't know what they're going to become, whether that's a disused car park or the muddy seed ball making activities. Something happens, I think, that connects to something very deep within us that is beyond the words that we can say, that is about the mystery of the cosmos and being on the planet. And something tricky can start to happen when we try to use art to make change, and that is that we can start to reduce art to a tool, and we can start to think in a limited way about art when we're trying to instrumentalize it to do a thing. So we're going to make this piece of art because we want this audience to do this thing, and we start operating in that standard neoliberal capitalist frame that we're so used to. And for me, impact producing is a little bit of a way of protecting the poetry of the art, because it allows me to articulate a campaign and a political strategy alongside the art, which means that the art can breathe and be art without being so instrumentalised. As well as making films, I have a speculative futures practice called The Things We Did Next, and yesterday actually we hosted an assembly for the future here. This Changes Everything was the film that I was working on with Naomi Klein that I showed when I was in Paris, dancing at the Moulin Rouge. But it's just one of many, many environmental films that have been the projects which have been some of the lead projects of films that have used impact producing. Probably one of the first films that was using this strategy was The Inconvenient Truth, the climate documentary. Gasland about fracking, and The Age of Stupid, which is another climate film, were sort of the pioneers in this space. So, impact producing. It's not actually necessarily new. Like, people have used art projects to convene people, to bring people together, to generate dialogue, to draw attention, to have discussions, and to make change forever. But in the documentary film space in 2012, a small group of people got together in the UK and tried to talk about, what is this practice? What are we doing? And they coined the term impact producing. So it's only 11 years that the word has been used. It's exploded in documentary film, particularly because in the UK and the US, to start with, a lot of philanthropic organisations put money into it. So, for filmmakers who are like all artists who have, precarity and scarcity, everyone's like, oh, there's money for this thing, what is it? There's a lot of interest in it. And also people that were already doing it were able to start to build a field of practice around it. So there's a link here, and I'll put it up again later. The Doc Society collaboratively built with practitioners in the field the Impact Field Guide. Prior to the term being coined, I'd worked a lot with Big Heart. I know that you're going to hear from Mark, who's here, and Rose has also worked with Big Heart. And I was very interested in thinking about how art and social change work happened, but I felt very lonely for peers. And I did a Churchill Fellowship, and I went overseas and connected with people who were doing impact producing just after the term was coined. And that's what I've done for the last 13 years. I've worked on a range of projects, and the articulation of the practice was incredible for me. It really has helped sharpen the work, and it's also helped build a field of practice globally. So there's a group called the Global Impact Producers Assembly, and I think we've got over 700 members around the world. We meet a lot virtually. And it's been a very exciting time in the development of the field. I have critiques, and it's still a very contested space, and I'll talk a bit more about this as I go on, but the question of what do we mean by change, and how do we think change happens, and what does reform versus transformation look like, all of these things feed out in this space, as they do in any space where people are trying to make change. And there's, again, coming back to the same challenges that face art in terms of being instrumentalised. When you have different entities competing essentially against each other, Get Up, Amnesty International, Red Cross, whoever it is, organisations are competing for our attention, our membership, our donations. There can be tendencies to choose campaigns that are perceived to be winnable, quickly winnable, so you can say to your membership, hey, we did that thing. And certain campaigns, particularly those that are around consumption and consumer-based activities, watch a film about plastic bags in the ocean, sign a pledge that you're not going to use plastic bags. That's a more measurable and quick and possibly winnable change. Not saying it's any less valuable. But if you're making a film about sexual assault or police violence, or colonial legacies, it's much harder to say, can you click here and do this thing? Oh, look, we changed that thing. So often when I'm working with filmmakers and artists and talking about impact, people often stop at the second circle here. So obviously we know art matters and you need to have beautiful, engaging art at the centre of this, which we protect. And then most people I talk to when I say, what do you want to do? How do you want to change things? They say, I want to raise awareness. And that impulse was the right impulse like 50, 60 years ago. When Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring and said, chemicals are killing birds, people were shocked. When people saw images from the Vietnam War of the use of napalm, they were shocked and they were activated. So in early days of kind of media activism, and hearing a fact becoming outraged was enough. But we live in such a saturated landscape with so much misinformation, with so many competing demands on our attention, that awareness just isn't enough. In fact, I think that we're reaching a point of saturation where the amount of awareness that we have about all the outrageous things in the world actually sometimes stops us from being able to act. So you have to offer people a pathway to engage, and it has to be meaningful because, again, we're savvy and we're literate. We know that just clicking something may not actually be the engagement to make change. So you need to think about meaningful engagement and pathways. And you also have to think about not trying to be an island. Like, you're an artist or a filmmaker or a researcher or a playmaker, whoever you all are. Sometimes when I talk about impact producing, I can see that people just are like, that sounds amazing, but I already have a job. Like, don't give me another job, you know. But this is not about you then having to become a mini NGO and do everything. It's about finding the others. It's about the entanglement. It's about the connection. It's about finding other people who are already in the space working on the issues. Who are the researchers? Who are the policymakers? Who are the grassroots rat bags? Who are the old retired lawyers? Like, who else knows about this and is already working on it? And quite possibly, if you're a filmmaker or an artist who's curious and interested in lots of things, you're probably going to move on to another subject or another area or another project. So who are the people who are going to still be working on that issue in 10 years when you're over here doing another project? So really building connections and partnerships is really key to this. So being an impact producer is a crazily dynamic and ever-changing role. It's like any kind of producing. And I was talking to Rose before about how hard it is to kind of find titles that encompass everything that you might be doing, from community building to fundraising to marketing, to planning to distribution to events, etc. And for an impact producer, this is about, you've done all the work of making your book, film, research project, art piece, and now you get to release it. Where are you releasing it? Who is your audience? Who's going to come and see it? What are you going to ask them to do when they come? Who else is going to be on stage with you? Who's going to be there to do the Q&A? Who else is going to write about it? So you're holding all of these things in your head at once as you kind of work with traditional distribution and event models, but you're trying to map a kind of campaign strategy across them. And so, again, when thinking about audiences, often when I'm working with people, I say, who do you want to see it? And they're like, everyone. It's not everyone to see it. And, you know, it's a common refrain, this idea of, I don't preach to the choir, like we've got to get further out there, we've got everyone to see it. But I would argue, and it really depends on the campaign goals, and I'll talk a bit about this when we talk about In My Blood It Runs, but you do have to, it's very worthwhile to think, like, to really drill down into who are they, where are they, how are they going to access this, what are they going to do with it, what platforms are they using, what are their behaviours. And if it is the choir, I would argue that the choir is not yet singing in harmony. Like, we don't have really strong and connected, powerful social movements of the strength that we need. And this is, I think, probably talking about that fractal and kind of entanglement of these networks that are required. There's no harm in starting, whether it's in a local or a virtual community, but with the people who are already close to the subject matter, the community, the participants, and building strength and cohesion with that audience, because they will then go and tell the others. Like, they will then tell the other, fractals that they're connected to. So it's I think sometimes, particularly now that we live in such a kind of mass media kind of moment, we get so overwhelmed by the idea of going like out there to everyone that we sort of we undermine the value of those that are closest to us. But I think there's incredible value in those relationships. So again, coming back to the partnerships and the networks, this is really, again, thinking about who else is already working on this issue, who's been working on it for decades, who's going to be working on it long after you, what's already happening in social movements. And if anybody's, obviously people are already doing work in communities, but also likely to be working with social movements, there's always disputes within social movements and about what is the most strategic thing to do, what we should be asking for. No, that's too ambitious. No, that's not ambitious enough. No, don't lock on to the bulldozer. Please just do a petition, and movements argue. And when you release something, you're stepping into that space. So the research that you do to understand what are people already doing, what are people already asking for, where are the points of tension in the movements, what are the tipping points, what's the language that people are trying to shift, and how can, when your project lands in the world, how can it advance what people are already doing? And sort of think about this sometimes as sort of the Venn diagram sweet spot of like, because if you're a researcher or a policy writer or someone that's developed, really long-term deep research, sometimes it can be hard to get attention onto that. But if you're a filmmaker who's made a film about a particular social issue and you can partner with a researcher who's got decades of knowledge, and you can show the film that brings in an audience and convenes people, and then they can come in and say, well, here's the data to back it up, and this is what we need, and this is what we're asking for. That combination and that sort of partnership is really just absolute gold. And also, like a film or art project, it has a burst, it has, and I think, a gap filler were talking about doing this as well. Like, you have the launch, you make the moment, you do the thing, and it's shiny and it's exciting, and then you bring people together, and then, you move out of the car park, or you have to move out of the farm, or the film release is over and you're making a new one. So you have this short period of time that you're in this sort of burst of energy, and it's really thinking very strategically about how to use that. I'll just see if is that on the trailer now, Tobias? I think it might be. I'm just going to show you the trailer. Before I do, has anyone seen In My Blood It Runs, the documentary? Oh great, a few of you. I'm going to show the trailer and then just talk a bit about the impact strategy for this film. Thanks. So, In My Blood It Runs is a stunningly beautiful feature-length documentary that was directed by Maya Newell in collaboration with Duane and his family. Not going to talk about the making of the film, but that's a whole other beautiful story. It's very hard to see this diagram, but right at the centre of it is the family, and then our close partners in Mabunta and Alice Springs on Arunda country, and then our funders, and then other movement partners and people that we're connected with. So the film itself was made very collaboratively over a period of time, and by collaboratively I don't mean shot and then shown to people at Rough Cut and they were happy and we went on. The family were deciding which scenes Maya would shoot. They would call her and say, hey Maya, we can't find Duane, can we pick you up on the way to driving around town looking for him? We want you to film this. There was scenes that were shot that were filmed in hospital after one of Duan's relatives had been injured. She'd been stabbed, and the family talked extensively about wanting to film that scene to show the care, because Duan is a nunkara, a healer. But they talked extensively about how do you show the truth of the violence that is occurring in the community that does not build on the existing tropes and stereotypes about violence in Aboriginal communities. And they were making very active decisions about both what was shot but then how it was edited in the film. So that level of control and collaboration was continued into how we developed the impact strategy. So the top photo is a large group of us with Duan and his grandparents on both sides and a number of senior Aranda leaders. And we had a 3-day camp where we looked at case studies from previous films, and we talked a lot about film distribution and the possible opportunities from a film. And we built out a whole set of key messages and framing for the way in which the family wanted the film to be released into the world, and identified the 4 key impact goals that they had. And these were about addressing racism, reforming education, both supporting First Nations self-determined autonomous education systems, as well as changing the mainstream education system, and working on juvenile justice reform. So my job was to be part of that meeting and then go away and do the movement mapping. Okay, the family want to do this. What's happening now in the education space? Okay, the ACARA reviews are happening. There's curriculum reviews happening. What's happening in juvenile justice? Okay, people are looking at the possibility of the review of Dondale, of raising the age of criminal responsibility, and then going back to the family and saying, this is what's happening in the movements, these are the possibilities, what are you interested in? And from that we built out our strategy. I'm not going to go through the details, but I've been working on this project, I'm still working on it for 6 years, and we did a lot of work showing the film to potential partners before it was released, having screenings with organisations, planning how it would be rolled out. Duan was invited to speak in Geneva in Switzerland, and he's the youngest person ever to have addressed the UNHCR. And you can find his beautiful speech online. And that was at the invitation of the Australian Human Rights Commission, who were presenting to the UN on how Australia was failing on the conventions of the rights of the child. So we had a speech read out from Duan on the floor of the Northern Territory Parliament, on the Senate here in Canberra, and we did a lot of, we were in cinemas at the start of COVID, and then we quickly went online. So we were kind of, I think it was a lot harder for films that released later into the pandemic, but we already had a lot of momentum and a lot of materials ready to go. So we went online very quickly. The film's screened in tens of thousands of classrooms now, and that's Duan at the UN. When we released in cinemas, we started with a big screening at Hidden Valley Town Camp in Mabantua before we went national. We took a delegation to Canberra where we screened the film in Parliament House to talk about First Nations education systems. We worked with the National Indigenous Youth Education Coalition to set up the Learn Our Truth program and their pledge, and supported them to raise money. So this is a kind of key example of when we started working with NIAC, they were quite small. They were obviously brilliant, and we knew they were going to grow. But we were able to make them our lead partner on those tens of thousands of school screenings that we did, and we were able to really lift their profile and run crowdfunding campaigns for them. And then we did a huge amount of work. Did anyone see these when I was 10 photos that went a bit viral? Yeah, so we were involved in working on the campaign to raise the age. So prior to when the community identified their goals, we didn't know about this idea of raising the age. So in Australia, everywhere except the ACT, who've recently changed it, the age of criminal responsibility in Australia is 10. In most countries, it's 14 or 16. So we had anticipated that we would be using the film to campaign for the closure of the Dondale Detention Centre, but when we did that movement mapping and we talked to partners, people said that's just not on the cards. There's no movement on that. The NT government are just, there's nothing that you could do there except bring attention to it. But we're very close to a tipping point on raising the age. And so one of the things that I did want to talk about with audience as well is about scale, because sometimes people think that the size of the audience is the metric that matters. But with the Raise the Age work, yes, we did very public work and we tried to get people to use the hashtag and post photos of themselves, etc. But the other thing that we did was that we found out that in every state and territory there were 3 staff in the Attorney General's offices, so it's 27 people nationally who were doing the work to review the policies to make the advice on a state and territory level, because it's not a federal policy, it's a state and territory one. And so we found out who those 27 staff were and we got them to see the film, and then we did a private Q&A with them. And so that kind of targeted small audience thinking is another sort of piece of this work. I'm going to wrap up there and take some questions if people aren't too hungry yet. But essentially, we need beautiful, amazing art. We have to have the great story. But then it's thinking about the clear goals that we have and the strategy of how to achieve them, where our audiences are, the particular audiences, and who the networks are, how we can be connected to the movements and others that are working in the space. It's also really dynamic because things just happen. The Black Lives Matter movement kicked off at the beginning of the pandemic as we were going online with the film, and that built a lot of interest in the film, and so we were able to start to speak to that first goal of the family around doing anti-racism work. And then the other piece is just luck. Social change is not an exact science. You can't apply the same, like an artwork, you can't apply the same process and expect the same results. It's dynamic, it's human, it's in motion, and sometimes you're super organised, you have resources, you do something that's amazing and it doesn't fly, and then other times you kind of chuck an idea out before it's completely finished and all of a sudden it takes off and you're chasing it. And social change exists like that as well. And something that I think is something we need to work on more is what I would call change literacy. And I liked hearing about the quantum change and different ideas about how change happens, because often what happens is that people see change through their silo. So that thing changed because of the direct action blockade. No, it changed because of the legal campaign. No, it was the shareholder campaign that did it. No, it was the marches on the street. Rather than seeing that it's that beautiful mess of so many things happening at once that is what creates the change. And it's what locks in change. If we change one thing, if we change a law, or if we change an attitude, or if we change a behaviour, it's not enough. You need that kind of interlocked matrix of all of these things changing at once. So yes, as one of the Zapatistas says, art doesn't try and readjust or fix a machine, it does something more subversive and troubling, and that is to show the possibility of another world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was amazing. I know it's lunchtime. Are you here for lunch?
I can be here for lunch for a short while. I have to get a plane.
That would be lovely, because we are losing Alex. Is there one question before we head off? Yeah. One.
Before you run off to the plane.
Hi Alex, that was wonderful. I guess the question, a practical question. You've outlined such a wonderful model of the importance of an impact producer and how it can activate change and work with artists and storytellers to do that. Virtually every artist that I know, including myself, would say, yes, this is the crucial step that we need. I would love to just hear any reflections on what the landscape is in Australia, for instance, in terms of impact producing. what opportunities there are for artists or organisations to engage them, and what else needs to happen to, I guess, build that culture so it becomes normalised, so impact producers are everywhere.
Yeah, great question. So there's the Global Impact Producers Assembly that you can look up. On my last slide, maybe if we could go back to it, I've got a couple of website links. I'm part of a group called Unquiet, and we run an event called Unquiet 90, which is a 90-minute Ask Us Anything call. We've got a Facebook group for those on Facebook called Impact Producers Australia New Zealand, so you could join that. I think there was a project called Good Pitch for a number of years, and they raised 12 million for 18 films, and so there was a lot of attention. Documentary Australia are a foundation that brokers money for films. So in the film space, it's increasingly recognised. There's a lot of philanthropic interest in it. And so that's usually where a lot of the resource comes from. So you fund the film separately to the impact. Sometimes a funder might fund both, but generally it's different. And the funding is usually specific to the social issue, so philanthropists that are interested in that particular issue. I think going back to the kind of more like the ideological question of instrumentalization, that's kind of a problem again, because really one of the things we talked about on This Changes Everything is books and films don't change the world. It's relationships and movements and people that do. These are catalytic, they bring people together, but it's what people do together that matters. And often I worked on a project for a long time called Napaji Napaji with Big Heart, and we achieved a national Indigenous languages policy. But Napaji Napaji was touring at the same time that 10 Canoes was out there, and that a number of other First Nations people were writing and publishing in language. And so there was a body of work. And there's a problem when you try and pick out one thing and you say, this project changed X, and it's like, that's not how it works. So I think what needs to happen is what needs to happen in every sector for social change, which is that we have to get out of silos, and we have to find ways of recognising that there's a degree to which we play the game to get funding because we live in a competitive world, but we have to not let that change how we relate to each other in practice. We have to build networks. We have to share everything. That's the only way we're going to make change. So it's very hard because the conditions that we're in, that we have to navigate to do our work, are the antithesis of what we actually need to do to make change. So we've got to keep that in mind. Yeah.